Emma Vance had never wanted to be a hero. At 28, she was a petite woman with auburn hair pulled back in a severe bun and hands that were surprisingly steady for someone who spent her life patching up wounds in the dust and chaos of war. She was a United States Navy medic assigned to a SL team, not as a trigger puller, but as the one who kept the shooters alive. To the hulking, tattooed operators of SEAL Team 7, she was simply Doc. They respected her, they protected her, and deep down they pitied her just a little. They carried rifles and night vision. She carried gauze and morphine. In their world of high-speed tactical violence, she was the necessary liability dot that perception was about to be obliterated. The mission was a standard. High-value target snatch and grab in the shock valley of Nuristan, Afghanistan. The objective was a small village perched halfway up a sheer, unforgiving mountainside. The intel was solid, the planning meticulous. The SEALs, a 12-man element from Alpha Platoon, would infill via helicopter under the cover of darkness, climb to the village, and extract their target before the sun could paint a target on their backs. Emma felt the familiar thump, thump, thump of the MH-47 Chinook's rotors in her bones. She sat wedged between two massive operators, her medical bag clutched to her chest like a teddy bear. The air was thin and cold. She ran through her mental checklist for the 100th time. Tourniquets, hemostatic gauze, chest seals, decompression needles. She prayed she wouldn't have to use any of them. The helicopter flared, kicking up a blizzard of dust and small rocks. The team spilled out, a dark tide of lethal efficiency. The climb was brutal. The mountain wasn't a slope. It was a vertical wall of loose shale and jagged rock. They moved in near silence, their breathing labored, their muscles screaming. Emma, carrying 40 pounds of medical gear on top of her standard kit, kept up, her small frame finding handholds the larger men struggled with. She was a rock climber from Boulder, Colorado. This was her element more than theirs. They reached a saddle just below the village as the first hint of gray touched the eastern sky. The lead petty officer, a man named Marcus Tank Thompson, signaled a halt. He was built like a brick wall and was the team's bedrock. He looked back at Emma, his face smeared with camo paint, and gave her a curt nod. She nodded back. So far, so good. The assault began with the sharp, controlled crack of suppressed rifles. The first 2 sentries went down without a sound. The team flowed into the village, a collection of mud brick huts built into the mountainside. They moved from shadow to shadow, stacking on the door of the target building. That's when the world turned to hell. A heavy machine gun, a PKM, opened up from a position they hadn't identified. It wasn't in the village. It was on the ridge above them. The initial intel had been catastrophically wrong. This wasn't a simple hideout. It was a fortified position. From the windows of every hut, from behind rocks, from holes in the ground, insurgents poured fire. The air was instantly filled with the terrifying snap of supersonic rounds and the deeper crump of rocket-propelled grenades. Contact front. Contact above? Tank's voice roared over the coms, but it was almost lost in the cacophony. The SEALs were caught in a kill box. They were pinned against the mountain, with nowhere to go but down the cliff they had just climbed. Fire was coming from 3 sides. Emma pressed herself against the cold wall of a hut, her heart hammering against her ribs. This wasn't a firefight. This was a massacre in the making. She saw the first one go down. It was Lieutenant James Jimmy Crocker, the platoon commander. A round hit him in the shoulder, spinning him like a ragdoll and dropping him into the dirt. Before anyone could react, a grenade exploded near the team's point man, Kyle Reese. Shrapnel tore into his legs. The screams, raw and primal, cut through the gunfire. Training took over. Fear was a luxury Emma couldn't afford. She broke cover, sprinting in a low crouch through the hail of bullets. She slid to her knees beside Crocker. His face was ashen, his eyes wide with shock. Blood pumped from a wound just below his collarbone. "You're okay." "Sir, you're okay?" she chanted, her voice a calm island in a sea of violence. Her hands were already moving, cutting away his gear, packing the wound with hemostatic gauze. A round smacked into the dirt inches from her leg, spraying her with grit. She didn't flinch. She just kept working. Doc! Behind you. The shout came from Petty Officer Second Class Davy Gonzalez, who was laying down a base of fire from behind a low rock wall. Emma turned, pulling Crocker with her, shielding his body with her own as she dragged him the few feet to relative safety behind a large boulder. She got a chest seal on his wound, checked his airway, and jammed a morphine auto-injector into his thigh. "Stay with me, sir," she commanded. He just stared at her, his lips already turning blue. She left him there, grabbing her bag and sprinting towards Reese. The gunfire was intensifying. The SEALs were fighting for their lives, but they were outnumbered and outmaneuvered. Tank was screaming into his radio, calling for close air support, for extraction, for anything. The reply was grim. The weather was closing in. Helicopters couldn't fly in the valley. They were on their own. Reese was in a bad way. His legs were a mess of torn flesh and exposed bone. Emma applied tourniquets high on both thighs, the windlass she used to tighten them slick with blood. He was conscious, biting down on a cry of agony. "Easy, Reese," she said, her voice low and steady. "You're gonna be fine. Just some new scars for the ladies." He tried to laugh, but it turned into a sob. As she worked, a massive explosion threw her sideways. The wool Gonzo had been using for cover dissolved in a cloud of dust and rock. The RPG that hit it sent shrapnel tearing into his back and legs. He crumpled, his rifle clattering away. Now there were three. Tank, seeing his team being systematically shredded, made a command decision. "Everyone, on me! We're moving to the draw. We can't stay here?" The draw was a shallow, rocky gully about 100 meters down the mountainside. It offered some cover from the ridge above. It was their only chance. The remaining operators, 6 of them, laid down a furious wall of suppressing fire while the others hauled the wounded. Emma grabbed Crocker again, draping his good arm over her shoulder, half carrying, half dragging the much larger man. They stumbled and slid down the treacherous slope, bullets whining off the rocks around them. They reached the gully, which was little more than a ditch filled with jagged stones. It was a horrible position, but it was all they had. They got the wounded situated as best they could. Emma assessed them. Crocker, GSW to the chest, tension pneumothorax developing. She grabbed a 14-gauge decompression needle and shoved it into his chest wall between his ribs. There was a hiss of released air, and his breathing eased slightly. Reese, bilateral traumatic amputation of the lower legs, tourniquets in place, in and out of consciousness. Gonzo, shrapnel wounds to the back and lower extremities. One piece had lacerated his femoral artery. The bleeding was catastrophic. Emma worked on Gonzo, her fingers probing the wound, trying to find the source. She packed it with hemostatic gauze, applied pressure, but the blood just soaked through. She could see it in his eyes. He was bleeding out. The firing from above had slackened, but it hadn't stopped. They were zeroing in on the gully. Tank crawled over to her, his face grim. "Doc, what's the sitrip?" She looked at him, her hands covered in blood up to the elbows. "Reese is stable for now, but he needs a surgeon yesterday. Crocker's chest is iffy." "Gonzo," she shook her head. "If I can't stop the bleed, he's got maybe 20 minutes. Tank's jaw tightened. "CAS is still a no-go?" "We're too high, weather's too bad. We have to move them. We have to get to a lower LZ." Emma looked at the terrain. The gully they were in ended in a sheer drop of about 50 feet. Below that, a steep, boulder-strewn slope descended for what looked like another 1,000 meters to the valley floor. There was no way to carry 3 wounded men down that. They'd need a stretcher for each, and they didn't have any. They didn't even have enough able-bodied men to carry them. Not while still fighting a rearguard action. An impossible choice hung in the air. Stay and they all die. Try to move them, and the wounded would likely die from the movement alone. Then Emma spoke. "I'll take them." Everyone stared at her. "What?" Tank asked, his voice flat. "The rest of you lay down fire. Cover us. I'll take them down." "Take them down how, Doc?" "You can't carry 3 men down a mountain?" Emma's eyes scanned the cliff face below them. She wasn't looking at a wall of death. She was looking at a route. Her mind, trained by years of rock climbing, was already mapping it out. The drop from the gully was a vertical face, but it was fractured with cracks and small ledges. And on her back she carried 150 feet of tubular nylon webbing, used for rigging casualties for helicopter extraction. It wasn't climbing rope, but it was strong. "I'm a climber, Tank," she said, her voice eerily calm. "I can do this." "You're a medic," he roared. "Right now, I'm the only chance they've got." There was no time to argue. Another burst of machine gun fire stitched the ground above their heads. Tank looked at her at the fierce, unyielding determination in her eyes. He saw the medic was gone. In her place was something he'd only ever seen in the eyes of his most seasoned operators, a warrior's resolve. "Go," he said. It was all he could say. Emma moved. She took the nylon webbing from her pack.